Have you ever felt the sudden weight of eyes on you when you've done nothing wrong? That feeling that crawls under your skin, that tightness in your chest, that silent warning your body gives before your mind even realizes danger is near. That's what Maya Thompson felt on a quiet Thursday night. Driving home through the familiar streets of her small southern town, Maya glanced at the clock 9:10. The sky was heavy with clouds, thick and gray, and the streetlights threw long, lonely shadows across the pavement. Her hand rested on the wheel, steady, almost mechanically, as she stole a glance at her husband beside her. Eli sat quietly, his fingers loosely gripping the dashboard. His face was calm, the kind of calm that could soothe storms, yet Maya knew him well enough to see the tension behind it. "You remember Aunt Linda's peach cobbler?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I swear, no one in the family does it better." Eli chuckled softly. "Better than Mom's. You trying to start a war tonight?" Maya laughed, the sound warm and soft, a brief escape from the shadows outside. The conversation moved to work, to the new policies Eli was trying to implement at the precinct. They joked, they teased, and for a few minutes, the world felt safe. Then, in the reflection of her rearview mirror, she saw the headlights. One car, a police cruiser. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe a routine patrol, maybe someone lost, but it stayed, and stayed. The cruiser's lights didn't flash, but its presence felt heavy, invasive. Maya's stomach knotted. She'd been here before, countless times, not in this car, but in this life, as a black woman on the road. The stories she'd grown up hearing came alive in that moment. The unnecessary stops, the questions asked with suspicion, the hands on weapons before any words were spoken. Eli, her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Do you see that?" He glanced at the mirror. "Yeah, just stay calm. Keep driving." But calm wasn't easy. The tension was thick, like smoke in a closed room. Every mile stretched longer than the last. Maya's heart raced. Her grip tightened around the wheel. Her thoughts flickered to the countless black women who had faced this before. The mothers, the daughters, the sisters who left home and returned bruised, shaken, or worse, never returned at all. Eli's jaw was tight. He didn't speak, only watched. He knew the officer didn't know him yet. That knowledge was a small relief, but it didn't erase the threat that hung in the air. After what felt like an eternity, the cruiser's sirens cut through the night. Maya's pulse jumped. Her hands shook slightly as she signaled and pulled over. The street was quiet, almost too quiet. The rain from earlier had left a slick shine on the asphalt, reflecting the harsh glow of the patrol car's headlights. The officer stepped out. From the moment he approached, his posture screamed suspicion, his gaze heavy with judgment. He didn't speak yet, but his presence alone was loud, demanding, accusing. Maya rolled down her window and offered the most polite greeting she could manage, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes narrowed. He leaned slightly closer, tone clipped cold. "License and registration?" Maya handed them over without hesitation, careful to keep her hands visible, careful not to breathe wrong, careful not to exist in a way that might be deemed threatening. She could feel Eli watching her, sensing her unease, restraining himself from saying or doing anything that might escalate the situation further. There was a long pause. The officer flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable but sharp. Then, without warning, he spoke again, his words low and dangerous. "Step out of the car." Maya froze, her breath hitched. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't swerved. She hadn't run a stop sign. She hadn't made a sound beyond polite compliance. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal in her own hometown, in her own life. On a quiet Thursday night, Eli's hand tightened on his knee, a silent anchor. His eyes met hers for just a second, a brief grounding glance before the officer repeated the order. "Step out of the car, now." Maya swallowed hard. Her fingers shook, but she obeyed. The door creaked as she stepped into the cold night air. The reflection of the cruiser's headlights painting her in stark, accusing light. Fear pooled in her stomach. She didn't know what would happen next. And in that moment, she realized just how fragile peace could be. The cold night pressed against Maya as she stood on the wet asphalt, the glow of the streetlights harsh against her skin. Her hands trembled, not from the chill but from the familiar tightening of fear that came whenever someone with a badge decided she was suspicious. She tried to keep her voice steady, her posture calm. As Officer Kane began his interrogation, "Do you know how fast you were going?" he asked, voice low, clipped. His eyes didn't just look at her, they measured her, weighed her, questioned her existence. I don't think I was speeding, sir," Maya replied carefully, glancing toward Eli for reassurance. Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. "You were swerving. Didn't keep in your lane. Acting suspicious." "Care to explain that?" Maya's stomach twisted. She had been driving perfectly, the same road she had taken hundreds of times before. And yet here she was, accused as if her very presence was a crime. She opened her mouth, but Kane's sharp look cut her off. "You people think rules don't apply to you," he muttered, barely above a whisper, but loud enough to sting. His words carried that old, familiar, weight-veiled sly, full of the prejudice she had spent a lifetime learning to navigate. Eli's jaw clenched beside her, a storm behind his calm exterior. He wanted to step in, to shout, to demand Kane treat his wife with decency, but he knew that in these moments, any sudden movement or raised voice could escalate things beyond control. He stayed silent, letting Maya take the brunt. Though his fists pressed against the sides of his legs, Maya nodded, hands clasped in front of her, fingers trembling. I apologize if I apologize. For what? Kane snapped. For being black. For driving at night, or for thinking you can play by your own rules. The words hit harder than she expected. Maya's chest tightened, memories bubbling to the surface. Her grandmother's stories of being stopped for driving to fancy and segregated neighborhoods, her mother gripping the steering wheel so tightly it left scars on her knuckles, the unspoken rules of survival whispered through generations. Kane didn't wait for an answer. He barked orders, his tone derisive, forcing Maya to stand in the cold while he walked back to his cruiser. She could feel the icy wind biting her face, the slick asphalt under her feet, and the sting of humiliation. Eli's eyes followed every movement, quiet fury simmering. You know, officer, Eli began, voice low, controlled. You're crossing a line here. Kane spun halfway, a smirk on his face. And who's gonna tell me that you're just another black man thinking he has the right to lecture me? Eli said nothing. He stayed rooted, aware that Kane would see any intervention as defiance, not authority. He let Maya endure, hoping she could hold herself together, hoping Kane's arrogance wouldn't turn the night into something far worse. Minutes stretched like hours. Kane returned, license in hand, flipping through papers as though he expected to find a hidden crime. Maya's hands shook visibly now, and she felt every stare of the imagined neighbors watching her fail a test she didn't even know she was taking. You know, Kane said, leaning toward her again, tone dropping into a sneer. I wonder how someone like you even manages a career. Mother of two, right? And yet here you are, nearly a criminal in your own car. I guess that's what happens when people don't know their place. Maya's throat burned. Her voice faltered as she tried to respond, to assert herself without provoking further hostility. But words seemed useless in the face of such blatant disregard. Of someone who had decided before meeting her that she was lesser, unworthy, suspect. Eli's fists clenched tighter. He felt the old blood of his ancestors pulsing through him, the anger, the grief, the indignation of centuries of injustice condensed into this one moment. He wanted to explode, to pull Kane away from his wife, to make him understand that respect wasn't a suggestion, but he knew it had to be done carefully. There was a line, and they were dancing on the edge of it. Kane returned to the car, leaning over the hood, as if deciding how far he could push them. I think I'm going to have a look in the back, he said casually. Don't mind me. Just making sure there's nothing illegal hiding in here. Maya froze. Sir, I don't consent to a search. He smirked. You don't have a choice. The words fell like a hammer. Maya's heart hammered in response, rapid and panicked, her fingers trembling on her thighs. Memories of her grandmother, of her mother, of the stories she had been told about stops that escalated too quickly, about hands raised before words were spoken, surged inside her. Fear and anger collided, a tight knot in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Eli exhaled slowly beside her, voice quiet but firm. I said, you're crossing a line. Kane ignored him, focusing on the woman he had already deemed guilty, a phantom of his prejudice. Maya felt smaller in the cold, isolated, yet a tiny ember of defiance flickered inside her. She would not break easily even as Kane reached for the car door, ready to assert his authority through force, not reason. The night stretched, tense and suffocating. Maya stood under the harsh glare of the headlights, her mind a whirlwind of fear, shame, and quiet anger. She realized, in that moment, that injustice often comes slowly, disguised as routine, until it hits you square in the chest with the weight of its inevitability, and Kane, with every word, every smirk, every unjustified motion, revealed the truth that had been hidden all along. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's slow, deliberate, and deadly in its subtlety. Maya took a steady breath and squared her shoulders. I don't consent to a search, she said, her voice calm, measured, but carrying an authority that came from knowing her rights. She met Kane's eyes, refusing to shrink, refusing to let fear alone dictate her response. For a moment, Kane froze, as if surprised that she had spoken. Then his expression twisted, his patience evaporating like mist. You think you get to decide, he barked, stepping closer. Before Maya could react, his hands shot out and grabbed her wrists, squeezing them roughly. The cold metal of her bracelets dug into her skin, and a sharp pain shot up her arms. Eli moved immediately, but carefully. He opened his door, stepping onto the slick asphalt, voice firm but controlled. Let her go. Kane didn't release her. He glared at Eli, eyes narrowing. And who are you supposed to be? The man telling you to stop? Eli said evenly, hands raised, body tense but non-threatening. Kane's smirk hardened into a sneer. He reached for his taser, pulling it from its holster with a practiced motion. The blue lights flickered across Maya's face, and suddenly the night felt like a cage, the cold air electric with danger. Maya, Eli's voice snapped, and it rang through her like a lifeline. She gasped, trembling, the sound cracking in the quiet night. Her mind raced. One wrong move could change everything. One step, one word, and the fear she'd carried her whole life might become reality. Eli's eyes met Kane's, and for the first time, he stopped pretending to be just another man on the street. "I'm the police chief," he said, steady and undeniable. "The new chief of this department." Kane blinked, disbelief crossing his face. He laughed nervously, a bark that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, right. I don't care who you are. Step aside." Eli didn't move. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, the weight of authority and truth pressing against Kane like a wall. Kane's jaw tightened, his hand lingering on the taser. He tried to assert control, to detain Eli as if the badge and the power of his position could still shield him from reality. Maya's voice trembled, high and urgent. "Please, please, don't." Her words were fractured, spilling from years of suppressed fear and trauma. Her eyes darted between Kane and Eli, heart hammering in her chest. She shook, not just from cold, but from terror, from the sense that the world could turn on her in a second. Then, headlights cut through the darkness. Another patrol car rolled to a stop, lights flashing. The officer inside stepped out quickly, eyes widening as recognition hit. "Chief Eli," he called, voice a mix of shock and relief. Kane froze, a flush of panic coloring his face. The pieces clicked in his mind. The man he had threatened, shoved, almost tased the calm, restrained figure standing beside Maya was not just any black man. He was the new leader of the very department Kane had served. The man with the authority to undo every action Kane had taken tonight. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with tension. Kane's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for words. I was just you were abusing your power," Eli said, voice calm but sharp. "You were harassing a citizen. You were acting on bias. Step back." Maya felt the tight knot in her chest loosen slightly, though tears blurred her vision. She let them fall freely, crying for the fear that had been with her for decades, crying for the countless times she hadn't been able to speak, crying for the weight of history that bore down on her every time someone in uniform saw her as a threat instead of a human being. Kane stammered, trying to justify himself, fumbling with excuses that now sounded small, ridiculous, and desperate in the face of undeniable truth. The fear he had once wielded like a weapon was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that he had been caught, exposed, and powerless. Eli's eyes never left him. "Step down, now," he said, voice firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had earned it, someone who had lived the reality Kane could never fully grasp. Kane hesitated, then reluctantly moved back, hands raised slightly. The taser lowered but still clutched like a last defense. Maya sank to her knees on the slick asphalt. Shaking, chest heaving, she rested her forehead against her palms, letting herself finally release the tension she had carried like armor all these years. Eli crouched beside her, hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her she was not alone. The night had changed in an instant. What had begun as a routine traffic stop, a collision of bias and fear, had transformed into a moment of reckoning. The man who had tried to wield power against her now understood, finally, the reality of his own prejudice. And Maya, trembling, tear-streaked, felt a fragile sense of relief. For now, for the first time in a long time, she was safe. And the truth was out in the open. The fluorescent lights of the precinct burned overhead, harsh and unforgiving, as Kane sat at a desk, shuffling papers, trying to craft a version of the night that didn't make him look guilty. He mumbled, quietly at first, then louder, a thin excuse tumbling into another. She was. Eli didn't interrupt. He stood behind him, silent, watching, listening. The patience in his stance was deliberate. He let Kane spill his lies, let him expose the fear and bias hiding behind his uniform. Then, with quiet authority, Eli pressed play on the body camera footage. Every motion, every word, every threat, the camera revealed it all. Kane's story crumbled under the weight of truth. There was no hiding behind selective memory. There was no rewriting history when it had been caught in cold. Unflinching clarity, Eli leaned forward, voice low but sharp, controlled. "Do you see what you did?" He didn't speak as the police chief now. He spoke as a man who had lived these encounters, as a black man who had watched generations of his people bend under fear and humiliation, as someone who knew too well how easily power could be misused. Kane swallowed, eyes darting, lips quivering. I didn't mean. Eli's voice tightened. "You meant exactly what you did. Every word, every shove, every assumption about her because of the color of her skin, that was intentional. You were scared, yes, but more than that you were comfortable wielding that fear over someone else. And that's what's wrong." The weight of the room pressed down on Kane. There were no allies here, no excuses that would stick. His bias, his fear of black drivers, his need to assert control every flaw, had been laid bare. Maya entered, steps hesitant at first, hands clasped in front of her. Her voice shook, but each word carried strength. "I want to make a statement," she said, eyes locking on the officer who had tried to humiliate her, terrorize her, and break her dignity. She spoke slowly, deliberately, recounting the stop, the accusations, the threats, and the fear that had gripped her heart the moment Kane had stepped out of his car. Her voice wavered only when the memories were too heavy, memories that weren't just from tonight, but from every glance, every stop, every subtle judgment she had endured her entire life. I've been stopped for nothing, harassed for nothing, simply because of the color of my skin, she said. Her words filled the room, carrying decades of pain. I've seen my mother, my grandmother, my friends, all treated like this. I've lived with that fear, and tonight it came alive again. Not because I did anything wrong, but because some people decide we are threats before they know us at all. Generational trauma surfaced in the raw honesty of her voice. The weight of it pressed into everyone in the room. Kane shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast, as the gravity of what he had done settled over him. After her statement, Kane was suspended immediately. Eli's commitment was clear. This was not just about discipline. It was about change. Officers like Kane, who abused their power under the guise of law, could no longer operate unchecked. The department would be reformed, policies rewritten, accountability demanded, and justice ensured for those who were too often voiceless. Maya and Eli left the precinct together, silence hanging between them. The night was cool now, still, but the air carried the remnants of tension, the remnants of what had almost become tragedy. They sat in their car, engine ticking softly, hearts pounding, bodies trembling. Eli reached over, taking Maya's hand in his, giving it a squeeze. Neither spoke at first. Words seemed inadequate after the storm they had weathered. She leaned against him, and he felt the tremors in her body, the exhaustion, the release of fear held tight for so long. "You're safe now," he whispered. Not a promise that injustice wouldn't exist, but a statement that tonight, at least, they had confronted it, faced it, and survived. Maya nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. The city outside continued on, unaware of the confrontation, the trauma, and the reckoning that had just occurred. And yet, within the quiet of that car, a sense of fragile justice settled in. The weight of fear had lifted, slightly, replaced by the clarity of truth and the resolve that things could, and must, be different. The quiet of their car felt different now. The tension that had wrapped itself around them all night had begun to loosen, leaving space for something heavier, something deeper, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the slow, aching clarity of what had really happened. Maya leaned back, her hand still shaking slightly. "It's not just tonight," she said, voice soft, barely above a whisper. "It's every time you leave home and the world decides who you are before you even speak. Every time someone with power assumes you're a threat. Every time fear becomes your constant companion, because they can't see past your skin. It wears on you. It hurts. And it never really leaves." Eli's hand found hers warm, steady. "I know," he said, voice low, tired but determined. "And that's why nothing will stay the same. Policies, training, accountability, they'll all change. No one else should have to go through what you just went through, what you've been going through your whole life. And I'll make sure the people in this department understand that." They held each other, letting the weight of the night sink into them, breathing together through the fear, the anger, the relief. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of two hearts sinking in the quiet. Maya let herself rest against him, acknowledging the truth of what they had survived. Tonight was terrifying. Yes, but it was not rare. She had seen it, lived it, and carried the memory of it like a scar. And yet, she was still here. They were still here. That mattered. That made a difference. "This isn't just one bad apple," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It's the system. It's the way people are allowed to think they have more right to fear and judge than we have to live. And that's why we have to speak up. Why we have to protect each other. Why we can't let it slide." Eli nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Exactly. Change isn't just about one officer, one stop, one night. It's about making sure every officer knows that respect is mandatory, that humanity is non-negotiable, and that justice doesn't bend for convenience or fear. We can't fix it all at once, but we can start. And we will start." They sat in the quiet together, letting the moment stretch, letting themselves feel every emotion they had locked down for decades. The grief, the anger, the humiliation, the fear, but also the courage, the truth, and the strength to survive it all. Maya wiped her tears and looked out into the street, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "People need to understand what it feels like," she said, voice strong now, steady. "Not just to watch it on the news, but to feel the weight of it, even for a second. That fear, that judgment, that pain. And then they need to ask themselves what they'll do about it." Eli rested his forehead against hers. "And for those of us who can act, who have the power to change it, we have to. We can't wait for someone else to fix it. We have to stand up, speak out, and make it right." The car was still, the night calm, but the lesson lingered. Racism and policing, in society, isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern, repeated until someone calls it out, until someone refuses to let it continue. Maya and Eli had faced it, exposed it, survived it, and in that survival lay a quiet power. And for the audience, the message was simple, yet urgent. See the injustice, acknowledge the pain, speak the truth, and protect each other. Justice isn't given freely. Humanity isn't assumed. It must be demanded. And every act of courage, every voice that refuses to stay silent, brings the world one step closer to fairness.